that app that.
Hey,
Hey,
here we are. Hello. What's that app? Oh my goodness.
There's the feedback app, right? We got to use the feedback app.
Yes, we're using featured.chat over here.
Right.
Hey friends, welcome back to another Dev Intersection. My name is Jeff Fritz, and that's Richard Campbell.
I'm all fuzzy. My youngest is engaged. We had a party last night, and it's an interesting phase of your life as a dad when your kids, or well, at least one of them, anyways, get married.
Oh my gosh.
I'm delighted and disturbed. I don't know how I got to be this old.
My oldest is starting to drive.
Yeah, you get teenagers. That's a particular horror when you see your car going away and you're not in it.
No. Don't do that to me.
How is this happening? What is coming here?
Right? I don't want to think about this. That's a thing. And the worst is I've got a 13-year-old right behind it, and she's already, well, since the older one has this car, that means I get my own new car. I get to choose a. No, you don't.
Well, but correct me if I'm wrong, because I have two daughters as well, right? The eldest one sort of fought tooth and nail for the next privilege, whatever that may be. And then you finally conceded that privilege, and then you don't wait anywhere near as long to give that privilege to the younger child.
Because you've already gotten used to, you figured out, all right, this is how it works with that's one.
It. Yeah, I think the older one didn't get a smartphone until like 13, and the younger one got it like 11.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And right, both the daughters, right, they're used to, and they were getting the hand-me-down phones at the time, right?
Well, because they smashed phones. Teenagers are hard on phones, man. Like, they dropped them, and it didn't matter. You could put armor, the OtterBox Iridium on them. They still managed to break.
Well, I thought it was interesting the number of phones that we as a family dropped in toilets.
I don't know that we ever had that one, but I have used this line, right? Because the girls, of course, pursued smartphones, and I had one, before they were cool, because I'm that kind of geek, right? And then, of course, their phones are always around, so it's like trouble at dinner, right?
Mm-hmm.
She who must be obeyed is saying, "Can we make a rule where there's like no phones at dinner?" Which is not a bad rule, but at the time I said, before you make that decision, and I got her a smartphone, and suddenly it wasn't a problem having a smartphone.
Yeah.
Don't make decisions until you're actually fully experiencing what's going on there.
Absolutely.
But then we did start doing things like we actually went on a 1-week vacation with no phones. We lived in British Columbia, we're amongst the wilderness, right? We went to the west coast of Vancouver Island, which is just truly pristine wilderness. And we had one phone. I brought my phone and I left it in the car.
Okay.
But no phones.
Nice.
We played a lot. Lots of hikes in forests and down by the beach, and a little bit of paddling around in kayaks, and playing Settlers of Catan in the evening. Like, it was good. I'm not saying they weren't delighted to have their phones back at the end of the week, but that was a good week.
Yeah. There's something to that. I used to take vacations. We'd go out camping and literally unplugged. I wanted to get away and offline. And the daughters didn't like that too much.
Well, it's an interesting break. I mean, it's got a deadline, right? It's like it's going to be for a week, right? This too shall end. But I also come to appreciate, the goal of a teenager is to establish a peer group and help shape an identity independent of parents. And the connection with that peer group is via that device today.
It is now, yeah.
Yeah, as much as you can talk about addiction, all that other thing, it's like, look, this is the conduit by which a peer group is established. Damaging that is hazardous. You have to be careful.
A couple comments in the chat room. Lee says, that sounds like an epic holiday.
I highly recommend the west coast of Vancouver Island. And not that I'm biased or anything, but I'm really biased. But we made a routine of family vacations. And I heard this statement the other day, and it hit me because, of course, it's over for me now. Both my girls are in their middle 20s. It's like, after you have a child, you have about 18 summers.
Yes.
And so our routine with summers were one summer would be somewhere in British Columbia or Canada at least, and the next summer would be somewhere else.
And that's what I'm trying to do with mine. How do we, right? Last year we took the kids to Disney with right after. No, we went right before the not the year before last. The November before last, we went to Disney right before DEVintersection in Las Vegas.
Right. Okay.
Because,
so you went to Disneyland, not Disney World.
No, we did go to Disney World.
You're already East Coast too, so you just pop down to Orlando.
Exactly.
Do your thing. It's like a 2-hour flight for you.
Exactly. Right. And the kids have no idea about time zones. Like getting outside the time zone. Like the wife went to Central Time once.
Right.
Once. And oh dear Lord, that wasn't a good thing.
There is something to be said about practice for some time zone change. Like changing time zones within the North American continent, like, not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's not easy about flying to Europe. That's just reality. It's always hard. Right?
Yeah. Speaking of having phones with you, Elliot Brand chimes in. If you had seen Bigfoot while you were out there, you'd be wishing you had that phone.
Yeah, not too worried about Bigfoot, but a big old brown bear, yeah, it'd be a bad day. Although, you know, brown bears don't like people. They stay away from people. If you find a brown bear out in the wilderness there, that's your fault. You snuck up on that's a bad idea. You shouldn't do that. That whole bear bell thing, all that stuff, is about letting the brown bear know well in advance, hey, there's humans coming this way, and you just won't see them. I've only seen a brown bear in the wild a couple of times, and because we weren't making enough noise. And you just move away. Black bears, not that worried about it. You know, the only hazardous black bear is a mama with cubs, which in reality means it's cubs. If you see, there's mama behind you. That's the rule, because the gods of vengeance and irony are on you. And the only way you see cubs is when you're standing between them and their mother's going to make a charge at you. Just move away. Black bears are very careful. But brown bears, they're bad news. And I had a girlfriend, you know, we would camp on Vancouver Island, and that's bear country. So you take your food in a cooler and you hang it from a tree, right? There's a process. It's not that difficult to do. There are even hanging areas, but in this particular place there wasn't one. So I didn't set it up well enough, and the bear got up the tree, broke the branch, got the cooler down, and I'd missed all this. I was sleeping, so you know it's early, very early in the morning, and my girlfriend's awake and she's poking me, and she goes, "A bear's got a cooler," and I open up and look out there, and there's the bear banging with the cooler. And I'm like, "That's not our cooler. That's his cooler."
Don't mess with that.
Yes.
Yes.
Put him in the food. And look, we can get another cooler. He can't.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about it. It's gone. We'll head into town today and get some food.
Yeah, that's the bear bag, the bear, right? Having that bear pack lifted 50 feet off the ground. Yeah.
It's a thing. I mean, and so, you know, I realize I grew up here. Like, it's just sort of a normal part of our lives. It's things you learn as a kid living in British Columbia. You learn what hypothermia is. You learn what to do in case of bear, and you learn what to do in case of mountain lion.
Okay. Mountain lion's a new one on me.
They don't usually come to town, but in bad winters or when they're ill, sometimes they'll come into town. They like house cats. Apparently, they're delicious with a little sauce.
Oh no!
But the thing with mountain lions is that they are ambush attackers. So they're very sneaky. They're hard to find. But it means if you encounter one, as long as you have eyes on it, it's not going to move.
Okay.
It wants to hit you from behind, and so it's basically wired to hold still until you look away. And just move away, eyes on.
Yeah, back away.
This is your education for walking to school in this part of the world, right? It's just what you live with.
See that, friends out there? You learn stuff with DEVintersection.
There you go. Yeah, we're doing DEVintersection in Orlando, so you should be way more concerned about gators. This is not a thing we think about in British Columbia.
Don't go swimming in the canal, right?
Oh my goodness. Don't go swimming, even pools. Check carefully, because apparently they hang out in pools too, right?
Yeah.
But little signs along those bits of waterway and stuff in Florida that say, do not enter. There's a reason.
Yeah.
Stay away.
Gators are a thing.
They're really a thing.
What about gorillas? Should we stare them down as well? A little known fact, there are there are monkeys in Florida.
Are they really?
Yeah. They brought monkeys to Florida to film a movie at one point, I forget, and they thought they had them all isolated on an island while they're filming the movie. This was years ago, 60s, 70s, and as they tend to do, they got off the island. And you can find them in the Florida state parks.
Yeah, that's the old Jeff Goldblum line, right? Like life finds a way.
Life finds a way, absolutely. Our friend Cam chimes in and says, "Look, just avoid water in Florida altogether." Cam Soper, hello.
Yeah, that's a wise consideration.
Yeah,
and it's nice to be there in April. You know, we did June last year, and it was a little warm.
A little.
It was warm and humid, and a little stormy too. It was warm enough that we weren't allowed to serve lunch outside. Not because of the storms, but because of the staff. You know,
really?
Because we do the big buffet lunches, lots of choices. Like, it's great food. I'm very proud of the food we serve at DEVintersection. But it was hot and humid enough that it's not appropriate for the staff who have to, you can go and grab your food, eat, and leave. But the staff are working that lunch for 2.5 hours. And so we had to move over to the Dolphin Hotel had some bigger rooms, and so we would direct people in there. Now, we also do that if the weather turns sideways, which it's Florida. The weather's always, especially Orlando, it's always potentially
it's gonna
rain. But given a choice, we eat by the canal.
It is so nice. The 1 or 2 days that you're able to get out there, sit by the canal, have a nice lunch, nice breeze. It's a great view too.
It's just that's a lovely complex, and we're right in the Disney property, so you can take a boat into the Disney areas if you want to go there as well. In fact, we're knocking up early on the Wednesday to go to the Star Wars exhibits en masse, all of us. So it'll be huge.
Hollywood Studios, Star Wars Galaxy Edge. Friends, here's how you get there, okay? Do not stop at that Chinese theater as you walk in. Go directly past it as fast as you can. I don't care if you go down the right side or you go down the left side around it, okay? If you go down the right side, you're going to end up in Toy Story Land, okay? Don't be distracted by the Slinky Dog. Go past the Slinky Dog, okay? It's going to be on your left. It's going to be the entrance. You want to get down there past, I forget the name of it's a ride where it's another one of those shooting games as you're on a cart going through the
too detailed.
Who cares? It's on the left side. You can't miss the entrance as you go down there. But the real entrance you want is run straight in the entrance, go all the way up to the Chinese theater, but don't go in the Chinese theater. Like I said, make a left, go past the ABC commissary, okay? Stay right tight against it and follow that all the way around. Don't go into Muppet Vision. The Muppets and Kermit the Frog, they're not your friend. Stay to the right of that, and there's a huge arch. Go under the arch, because the first thing that you see when you get through that arch is an X-Wing fighter. And it's glorious.
At that moment.
Yes. Because that's just the first one of moments where you're going to go. Because after you get past that, the new ride that they just opened in December, and that is, there's all the stormtroopers in it. I haven't ridden this one yet.
Yeah.
But with that first ride, and you're going to need a reservation to get in on that ride. You're going to need a fast pass to get in on it. You're not going to be able to just walk right up. It's right there. But the second ride, the ride that everybody wants to ride, because there is no experience like this. No, it's not Buzz Lightyear, Gareth. As you walk further in, and you actually have to walk down a hill, is flying the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, that's apparently the thing. I mean, as you know,
find 5 friends and line up, and you each get to take a position sitting in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon,
and the gunnery turrets too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I know, that's an experience.
Oh, it's so good.
Well, we're gonna have some fun, brother. No kidding.
Yeah.
And I'm sticking around for the trailing weekend to do another Kennedy tour.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm a space nut. Anybody who's a space nut. The Kennedy is it's a half hour, 45-minute drive. Kennedy Space Center.
You can Uber there.
Yeah.
And it's half the price to Uber there that is to Uber back.
Isn't that funny like that?
Yeah, funny how that works. But I almost do it twice a year these days, and I think my tours are pretty good. You've been on my tour.
Yeah. And seeing that Space Shuttle Atlantis is so moving. They do it so well.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful vehicle. I mean, as people who grew up through the 80s and lived through that entire shuttle program. I mean, here's a thing that went to space, and it's
sitting there.
It's sitting right there. Oh my gosh.
This is the time when we were together there. It's because we know the history of the vehicle. We were alive during it. We know the incidents and so forth.
Yeah.
It's as interesting what is marked on it as what is not marked on it.
Yes.
And once I got that sense, like the easiest thing to point to is the extension Canada arm, which they added Columbia tragedy, so that they were able to look at the underside of the shuttle and inspect all of the tiles. That's on Atlantis. It's sitting there, but it's not marked in any way.
Yeah, it's just part of it that just there it is.
And so I look at that, and because I know why that thing is there, what it was about, and how important that story is, and it's not really mentioned. Then you go over to the Apollo exhibit with the Apollo 5 lined up there and say, what's not marked here that we don't know about?
Oh, I hadn't considered that.
That's, I think the same thing, right? That used to be a spacecraft. Now it's just an artifact. And there are many things that are labeled, but there are many things that aren't.
Yeah. Interesting things that you might want to know about at some point.
Quite possibly, right? It's the harder stories, the more difficult things that happened, the changes that came with hard fought experience, and in some cases the loss of lives.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to get some work done, Frank? Because we tell, and I hear a rumor there's an Elijah Manor around here somewhere.
There might be. So let me ask you a question before we invite Elijah on. I sent out a tweet over the weekend. I've got my Microsoft hat on here because I did a little Microsoft work over the weekend. Some discussion about that. And
your job?
Yeah. And so, right, ASP.NET's been a thing that it made my career. For the past 20 years, ASP.NET has been a thing out there in preview, release in 2001, 2002, and web forms has been very much central to my career for most of those.
Leading that tool. I mean, we did an interview on .NET Rocks with you as the guest, talking about, hey, well, Jeff Fritz is responsible for web forms. Blame him.
Yeah. Wait, no, don't. Anyways. But we got into the concept of view state, and as we think about what code folks have written that works with web forms today, that they're going to want to migrate into another environment later, and I've been working.
Starts with a B, perhaps.
Starts with a B and rhymes with laser. But when you want to copy your code that works over there, there's concepts that don't exist over there that we need to shim and kind of make available. And I ran into this question of, well, what if we just put a view state API over there, not actually do anything with it? Right. Just do the Blazer-y type thing for managing state behind it. But what if we just put the API there so it looks the same, so your code, if you copy it over, just works?
Just runs.
Oh, the amount of flack that I got out there for talking about view state.
There's some serious scars around view state. Serious scars. One of the things that Strange Loop, that startup I did back in 2006, started with was managing view state.
Yeah, there, see?
I had run into, Strange Loop was founded by a group of folks that were doing performance tuning on websites, before it was cool. I ran into multi-megabyte view states.
Crazy stupid.
Well,
what are you doing?
If you build a grid with controls in each cell with a repeater, suddenly you've got 50 odd controls that all have a state bag, and ta-da, there's 1.5 megs of view state being hauled back and forth. Works great on your machine.
Yeah.
Even on the interior network at 5 millisecond latency, you're like, hoo-ah.
Right.
Then you on the internet, it's like, where'd my page go?
Mm-hmm. So what if I just stick a empty dictionary there, and if we're not putting anything into view state for our components, but if you need to put something in view state, you can, and you can retrieve it back.
Yeah, and the problem is you're always going to, as soon as you say the V word, there's some pain, right? And so you're just seeing old scars. That is old scar tissue right there. That's what it is. And
absolutely.
And it's legit. Like, I know why it's there, but it is scar tissue. And then, this is a conversation we've had for years being in software this long. It's like, are these scars of hard-fought wars that actually represent wisdom, or are they just pain and make you blind to progress of things?
Mm-hmm. So let's encourage folks to get to a better place using better methods and make it look the same as what they were using before. And I put an obsolete flag on it so that if you are continuing to use it, you're going to get nagged on every build.
Yeah, it should be a warning. But I think is there anything better in this world than taking an old piece of code that you're vaguely unsure about, running it through some kind of wizard to shift it into a new platform, and it compiles?
Absolutely.
And functions more or less with some warnings.
Yep.
You know, it's just smashed with a pile of criticals, then you're nowhere.
Yeah.
But to just give you there's some hope that you make it through the next stages. That's very powerful. You talk about rehabilitating software nobody's touched for a while. That's an interesting moment. And let's make very sure when Fool's Navel says, I'm going to use that view state for everything now, that is not correct. You should not. Don't do that.
Don't
not a thing.
Don't do that.
Don't. No.
So,
yeah.
And Elliot Brand, I think, points out correctly here. I don't think folks fully understood. I don't think they fully read the issue that was opened. They just saw view state in Blazor and went, no.
Yeah. Let us know. Well, and admittedly, it's their own old pain, I presume.
Yeah.
But also let us not repeat the mistakes of the past.
Absolutely. Sure.
But very reasonable statements. But, if we tread carefully, maybe there's some possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And don't use go to bad.
That's bad. Very bad. What do you say we invite in our friend Elijah?
Yeah, let's do that thing.
He's a web developer that's been doing things for a while here.
We'll see how the technology holds up today. And
I'd already blipped once, because as we extend the call here we go.
Bonk.
There's Elijah. Let me cue him up.
Hello.
A little low.
Hello. Let me...
All right, yeah, there I am. Hello.
There you are. Queued up. Can you tilt your camera up a little bit?
There you go.
There we go. That works. You got a little bit of light just above your head.
It's glowy.
Yeah.
I can lower my seat. I think I can. There we go. Is that better?
Yeah, that works. There we go. Let's bring him in. There's Elijah Manor.
Beautiful.
How's it going there, friend?
Thanks for having me again.
Oh, excited to have you back, and stoked about this CSS for developers. I don't know if I really understand why so many people struggle so hard with CSS. I know I do, but I just presume I'm dumb. And so I was delighted that you had a session that's specifically like, okay, you're a developer and you got to get your head around CSS. That just made me smile.
Yeah, when I first made the idea of the talk, I was talking to some friends, and they're almost joking at me because, like, wait, CSS for developers? Like, developers need to know CSS. And it's really targeted for people doing front-end stuff.
Right.
But I was trying to explain the situation. I was like, well, I actually fit this boat. Like, I've always leaned toward heavy JavaScript because I came from ASP.NET and C#, and so I really gravitated toward that. And there was always someone on my team who was really good at design and CSS, but I never really spent much time on it. And again, it kind of felt a little weird, so I just kind of did my JavaScript thing.
Right.
But eventually, I got hired on as a senior front-end dev at a company, and I told my boss, I'm like, my weakness is CSS, and he knew, but the rest of my team didn't, so they just assumed like I was excellent at everything, and I'm like, and so I knew very, very quickly I needed to somehow fill that gap of knowledge. But unfortunately, I would ask my friends, it was like phone a friend at night. I'm like, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, and give me some books or tutorials, and they're like, unfortunately, they couldn't point me to any. They're like, you just learn it. You learn it over time and like struggling through problems, and I'm like, I need to know it now. So
hard way, basically.
What was that?
It was the hard way. Like,
yeah.
hammer it through. Just keep mashing the keyboard. Eventually, something good will happen.
Yeah. So over a year, me trying to fill that gap, I would try to notate like things like aha moments, like, oh, I wish someone had told me this. And then I would interview my friends, asking them kind of their aha moment. And then I was like, maybe I should make a talk about this. So it's more like trying to bring some logic and structure what most developers understand and applying it to CSS. And so the interesting thing about my talk is I try to target 3 different personas, because it's really hard to know in your audience, you know.
Sure, yeah, you don't know what's going to be in the room, right?
Yeah. So I have a backend Brian, and most actually, when I poll my audience, and most of them relate to backend Brian. I say he's a computer science major. He's recently been moved to the front end. JavaScript and HTML makes sense. CSS is frustrating and seemingly unmaintainable, and they tend to lean toward Twitter Bootstrap or utility framework.
Right, like make this go away.
Yeah, and so most people relate to that.
Sounds like you, Elijah, too.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I came from. Yep.
Yeah, sure.
And then we have Junior Jacob, and so he maybe went to one of those boot camps, you know, like 6-month or a year boot camp where they teach you everything. But it's like so much information on the web, and it's hard to really know, like, well, what's the modern thing to do? Like, there's so much out there. And then there's mid-level Melissa, and so she's really comfortable and could do her job, but it might be somewhat dated or painful, like to do what she's doing, where there might be easier ways. And her code tends to get unmaintainable eventually. So with each point I have, like little heads will pop up, like this is a Junior Jacob or this is a backend Brian.
Oh, nice.
And I get a little more in depth as I go, and then I switch to the next topic. And so it's been received pretty well, and I try to have something for each of those personas. But really, most of them, when I poll, it seem to be backend Brian or mid-level Melissa. So.
Sure. Well, and part of the, you know, titling and abstracts, like how do people select sessions? That's always its own sort of dynamic. Who do you get into the room on a given subject? But and it does seem like, because it's literally, you know, your backend guy's literally you. Obviously, it's probably the easiest narrative for you to pull off. And I'm always appreciative of experienced developers who learn something new and remember being the newbie, and then can communicate that you're frustrated with these things because you know you can do stuff. You know, I'm not lost here. I'm just why is this so hard?
Yeah, a lot of times I would find myself like in DevTools, either Chrome or Firefox or what have you, and I'd just be poking through some CSS attributes and like hitting the drop down and then just trying each one. I'm like hoping it will magically fix my problem.
Right.
You know, just totally random. And of course that, you know, occasionally it gets you there, but then you've added so much CSS in your DevTools, you're like, what actually fixed my problem? Like, what can I delete? And I mean, it's not a way to develop. Like, providing some kind of understanding or framework is really helpful.
So okay, you mentioned Twitter Bootstrap earlier, and I noticed you called it Twitter Bootstrap and not just Bootstrap, right? And I know a lot of folks, right, as soon as they see that Bootstrap-inspired, Bootstrap-wrapped website, they cringe. Oh my gosh, no, this person, right, they built the simple, the lame thing. They didn't even think about this. They went and grabbed a theme. What should we as developers be looking at as the go-to CSS framework these days?
Yeah, I don't mind so much when people use it, but oftentimes the fact that they're using it means that they might not be able to go much further than that. But I tend to like the material UI stuff that kind of Google came out with. They have a lot of CSS that looks nice. I'm fine with Bootstrap as well. It's just that backend Brian tends to lean towards something, which is fine. But once you need to go outside of those boundaries and actually do something that's not specifically an example, then that's where it's really good to have like an idea of what's really going on. Another thing, Tailwind CSS is pretty popular as well, and what they focus on is providing teeny little CSS classes that do one very small thing. Like there's a class like margin 12 or margin 10, and it just gives you a margin of 10. And so you basically are adding all these little classes on your elements. I tend not to go that route, but a lot of people love it. So there's lots of different ways to handle CSS, but I would be fine with Bootstrap or Material UI as a beginning point. Most of the companies that I work for tend to want their brand to feel very different, and so we tend to create everything from scratch. But not everyone can do that. So
it's expensive, time consuming.
Yeah, it is.
And often brittle. I think it's tough to make robust CSS that's going to tolerate a lot of different pages, right? It's like you got it to work, but how does it render on mobile? How does it render in Safari?
Yeah, totally. One of the interesting trends, now I'm more focused on the React world, so I'm not as sure some of the trends with Angular and some of the other frameworks, but one thing that we tend to do, which is really nice, because most things are component-based these days.
Yeah.
And so typically we have a folder with our component, and then we have the JavaScript, and we'll have the CSS and the unit tests usually in the same folder.
Right.
And the interesting thing is we could require, like import with JavaScript, our CSS or whatever flavor, Sass or less or whatever, which makes it really interesting because at that point, one of the frustrating things in CSS historically, like before I used React, was like you're afraid to delete anything. You're like trying to clean up after yourself. Yeah, exactly. And so the cool thing about importing the CSS for that component is if you stop using that component, like it's not used anywhere, then you're not requiring or importing the CSS that goes with it. So your build, like when you actually compile everything, if you're not using the component anymore, you're not actually shipping the CSS anymore.
Right.
So it's kind of, now it's still on your disk in your GitHub repo, but it won't be shipped to your end user, which is really cool.
Yeah, the bandwidth's the concern here, not disk storage space. But it is interesting that the sort of React component model, which I think most people struggle with, if you've been doing web dev for a while and you're used to the sort of unified file approach, this kind of, no, these are in discrete components and they have all their bits together with them. I think that freaks a lot of people out. And I'm more worried when you're thinking that way of how do I make sure the style is consistent component to component across multiple pages.
Yeah, and there's the technique I mentioned. There's different ways to do it. One would be the approach where if you don't do anything, it actually takes the CSS and jams them as kind of inline definitions on your page. But you could actually, in Webpack, you could tell it, when you actually build it, I want you to pull these things out into an own separate CSS file.
Yeah.
So it's more akin to what, the way people have developed for a really long time. Yeah, but then you have the other pendulum where there's other libraries that inject like dynamic stuff everywhere. And
you can make it scarier, you say.
Yes.
Oh, goodness. There's a couple comments here in the chat room I want to come back to here. Elliot Brand says that he likes Bootstrap. There it is. But doesn't like to stick with button primary and those classes that make it look completely default. Likes to extend and customize a little bit. And that feels like a little bit of what you were describing, Elijah. Ancient Coder, she chimes in here and says, true, it's time consuming, and that's why she tends to opt for Bootstrap just for the ease of use.
Yeah, again, it could be a great starting point, and then just start tweaking it. If you get the actual raw, like less or Sass files, then you could use some of the power of those languages, which those are like preprocessors, where you could actually extend, like say, I want to use this base definition, but add on and make your own, or you could add mixins. There's a lot of really fancy, if you're using a preprocessor, some really cool stuff that you could augment to the root files that come in. Although like you need to be careful.
Well, it's like you read the next question, and what we need to be careful about. Gareth actually says that's a pretty good discussion. What are those preprocessors, less and Sass, and what do we need to be careful about with those?
Yeah, those are great questions. So that first job that I went to where I was expected to know everything, so we use Sass there, and there was a lot of code that had been there for a really long time, and with code that's been there a long time, you just like, I need to go in here and add this one thing. So you just find that spot, and then you just, add something right there, and you don't really have the big picture of how everything's put together. And so you could
explosion.
Yes. So with these preprocessors, you can nest your selectors, which normal CSS, there's no nesting. Like each line is, its own declaration. But if you nest it, basically it compounds itself. So if I have like an anchor and then underneath I have a span, then it would really split out to anchor space span. So it's like a span's underneath an anchor. But you can nest it and not have to worry about repeating yourself. Anyway, one of the dangers of that is if you just keep nesting over and over again, and it's very tempting once you start doing that, then the end result is this really long, complicated selector, and the problem with that is there's something called CSS specificity, and a lot of people that I approach or are new to CSS don't understand the concept. But the more complicated your selector is, basically it's saying I want to be the most specific selector. Anytime if I match something, I'm going to be the one that applies my rules, and it will overwrite many other rules. So if I have a single anchor that says it's blue, and then I have a div with a span and then the anchors underneath that, that's much more specific than the general one. If it sets a different color, then that's the color it's going to be. And so you need to be really, and so that's why people put pound importance on stuff, because they're like, I just need this to work and I don't know why. And so one of the dangers is not nest too deeply, because that will really kind of shoot you in the foot. So to combat that, what a lot of people do is try to come up with a naming convention on how they name their CSS selectors.
Right.
A common one's called BEM, stands for block element modifier. So essentially say, and usually the component that I'm building, like maybe a media component, they would start with media and I'd have a dash, and then, you know, what part of the media component am I dealing with? Maybe the image. So maybe media dash image, and then the modifier is like, is this reversed or is this a special version? Like, so anyway, so you name it that way, and that helps you to reduce the amount of nesting you do. And also, you have to keep in mind that CSS is kind of like JavaScript was back when I was first starting, where everything was global. So if I had a JavaScript function, I'm competing my namespace with, you know, maybe a library that you have that you called sort, you know, or something. Well, I might have a sort method too. And in JavaScript land, whichever function was defined last would override the previous one. So CSS is the same way. Whichever one's defined last could override previous one. So by having some kind of a naming convention can help with some of those dangers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but you also get into that speaks to a culture of developers who want specific control over things too. You know, they get into that, just do exactly what I say, as opposed to understanding this more template mindset that we need to generalize these things, and when it's not rendering exactly the way we want, think about generalized modifications to it as well.
Yeah, and part of it depends, like, since a lot of people these days are developing in a component, and I mentioned in React we typically have a CSS for a component. You want to make sure that those don't clash with another component. So which is why having some naming convention or leaning toward one of these other paradigms of CSS modules or dynamically generating your CSS, which again, that's a slightly more risky on the pendulum. So having unique names is definitely helpful, because so you can understand it. If I add this component or remove it, I'm not messing up other things.
I mean, side effects are the ultimate sin. But I would also think that as soon as you're starting to get into very specific styling within a page, you're kind of failing at the template mindset. Like, use this as little as possible. The perfect page has no page-specific styling.
Yeah, so it's definitely, and most of these frameworks, you would have some kind of a foundational styling of things that things would inherit, and then...
I'm just being wildly optimistic here, too.
FuelSnable takes it just a step further here and says, well, just add a GUID suffix to all names.
So that's funny that you say this.
Oh, no. FuelSnable, what did you do?
True.
So a lot of these other alternative ways to do things will do that under the covers. So CSS modules and styled components and some of the other CSS and JavaScript frameworks will guarantee everything is unique, and they'll totally mangle the names so that they are completely unique and won't override each other. However, many of those also, there's usually a step that you could say, okay, I actually want you to pull out the CSS into its own file and kind of have that, again, best practices that have been around for a while. Again, it's arguable that best practices should be changed, but yes, what you say, it does happen, and it is interesting to see.
Okay, interesting. That's what Elijah means when he says interesting.
But putting all of our CSS styles and classes into a different file, that helps with download and delivery, right? And the end user experience, because hopefully that CSS sheet, that extra file, is cached, right? And we don't need to reload it every time you come back and visit the website.
Yeah, and there's many different approaches of what I'm mentioning. Like one, for example, like maybe there's you have a website and there's a whole administration section that most of your users don't typically use.
Yeah.
So what you could do is you could kind of house that in a separate section and dynamically import that if the user actually has that menu item enabled, and so they're only getting that JavaScript, but also only getting that CSS that comes along with it. So we could kind of section our site in many different sections. To your point, we could still split out the CSS into its own file so that it's cached as well. So there's lots of variations of how we do this, but I think from a larger standpoint, only loading the portions that they need to see at that time is good. Like Amazon's a great example of this. A lot of their site isn't even loaded until you start interacting with the website.
Right.
Like it'll dynamically pull in code maybe if you mouse over a certain section, because it knows like the probability of you using this section is pretty high. So we're going to pull in the code associated with that, and hopefully it's ready by the time you need it. And so you can do some really interesting kind of live loading and
right. You notice another on Amazon when you scroll past the fold, right? As soon as you hit page down, because a lot of folks don't hit page down, right, until they're a little bit more interested in the product. Don't load up the stuff to do the comments and discussion and the images for the ratings and all that stuff that happens way down lower. Load up those images about the product. Prioritize that, the stuff above the fold, right? That appears when you first navigate. Yeah,
those are great points. And these are actually some things that so I started with jQuery like heavily back in when it was all the rage, and we were trying to solve problems like that too. But it's just a continual thing that now that websites or web apps are so interactive, you almost need to do stuff like that so people aren't annoyed with you.
One of the performance automation tricks we did in Strangeloop was programmatically preloading resources for later in the page.
Yeah.
So that the page renders, so there's something for the user to look at as early as possible. But then you continue loading stuff in the background while they're reading. The main sin is rendering, right? That every time you render, you twitch the screen and you disturb the user.
Yep. And
so being careful. It's only when they're already disturbed, when they're scrolling, do you cause a render to happen.
Yeah.
It's wild art, and there's the balance between the performance, but we only want performance because we know that faster pages make better sales. When you recognize that the goal was a sale, for example, as an e-commerce site, then there's all the psychology of selling going on as well. As what are the things that make people comfortable enough to make a buying decision? And performance is only a small part of that.
It is.
Totally.
But it's not the whole story. Like I see sites when we were doing real work, and goodness knows that was a while ago. You see sites where they had gone so hard on performance because all they cared about was getting that load time down that they sacrificed a lot of good user experience. So it's like that site is really fast and horrible. So I very quickly came to the conclusion I need to go somewhere else.
But the load time is definitely a thing, right? Nobody wants to wait seconds, minutes for an application to load, right? If I'm trying to go read the latest news article about how my favorite sports team is performing, and I go to this website and it's taking 4 or 5 seconds to load, the next one's going to load faster. I'm just going to pop over there. Maybe there's a problem with that website, and
maybe back and maybe I won't.
Right.
Yeah, those are great points, and part of it is perceived performance. So there's the idea of how fast it actually is, and then Richard was talking about like delayed either initialization or delayed loading, and so those are kind of perceived. It feels faster, but there's still more to do. And then the other one is with React and some other frameworks, you can actually pre-render the first render on the server. And so when you, like for Facebook, and that's why Facebook made React or started using it because they knew their users, if their first experience was a big loading spinner, then that would be
look at
really...
that. Oh, that's a lot of PHP in action, man. Holy, Facebook is scary.
That would be pretty bad. So they knew they needed to pre-render and like have their messages and have some of that stuff already. So when the first page hits, it came from the server exactly how it is, and then what happens is the JavaScript will overlay and then wire up all the event listeners, and then at that point it's interactive. And so at that point, when they click things, it's only loading the pieces it needs. So it's a nice, and so if someone turned off JavaScript, you could actually make it so the page is still interactive, like it's smart enough to know if JavaScript's enabled.
Yeah.
I want you to actually use Ajax to get data, but if it's off, then I want it to be a full like post back. And so you can do some of those tricky things. It's harder and it's more work, but with React they have that kind of built in out of the box, so you could.
I don't know how many folks you encountering right now where it's like we need to make our page work even if JavaScript is turned off. Is that still a thing?
Most clients and customers I talk to aren't thinking about it so much because a lot of the ones they're working on are either like there's already a page, like those are helpful if it's like there's no login and
the landing page.
Yeah, a landing page, or it's a news site or something that again you don't have to log in. But once you have a login,
we're going to JavaScript.
People will go in and then you can kind of say this product requires JavaScript. So, but it really depends on what you're building. And so I see that a lot less because either it's an internal app that people just want it to be, or it's a paid app and they're behind a firewall or paid wall. So.
Elliot Brand mentioned here about couldn't Visual Studio be better at scanning class attributes in a project and figure out what class are being used? Actually, it sort of goes back to, do we just need better tooling for CSS? Like why is tooling so bad for CSS, or is tooling good for CSS? Like it just seems that's part of the problem.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So if you have TypeScript, which it seems to span a lot of the technologies. So TypeScript's pretty popular with React these days as well, and Angular and all that. You could actually. So the cool thing about this is, if you're using CSS modules, which is one of those ones where it feels like Sass or less like a preprocessor, but when you import it, instead of just saying require media dot, less or whatever, or Sass, you actually save it off as a variable, like an object. Like I want to import styles from media.css, and then you could actually use that object and hit dot, and then it will actually use IntelliSense and tell you all the classes that you have in that file. And if it's wrong, it's a compile error. Like it's not going to run. It's not going to compile at all or run. So, and that's VS Code. Like I imagine Visual Studio probably has that as well. And so the tooling, as long as you're using TypeScript, or actually some of the extensions I've seen will also do that, even if you don't use TypeScript. Sure. So it's a lot better. Now, I don't see them recommending what you should use. Like, oh, this is a button. You should probably use one of these buttons. But as long as you're importing it, and it kind of makes sense if you're in the button module, then it would probably show you the things that you should use for a button. So yeah, it is getting better from what I can tell, which is nice.
For sure. Yeah, tooling continue to improve. So I get the hint that you're working more in VS Code these days in Studio. Yeah,
I haven't used Visual Studio in a really long time.
Wow.
And VS Code is amazing, and I'm pretty much an editor. Like, all right, I used to switch editors all the time. I did brackets. I love the idea of having an editor that's based on like technologies that I in every day, like Node and HTML and CSS. And so I used brackets, which was an Adobe product for a while. Yeah. And then I used GitHub Atom. I love that. But then VS Code came out, and I'm like, it was really hard to compete because they were just coming out with features like all the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's so fast compared to a lot of the others, and they're still iterating so quickly. It's like, oh my goodness, a new month came out, and here's all the new things.
It's one of those where you realize this is what Microsoft's really good at, building tools for developers. Like that's their secret. They're magically good at that. And when they pour energy into something like VS Code, you see it. It happens so fast.
Well, and it's available for different operating systems. And so
I
use a Mac primarily, and so it's like, oh yeah, it came out with a Mac, and so it's really nice. And now there's a Unix version of it, so that's great. And Windows, obviously, and yeah, it's really quite great.
So, what extensions do you load in VS Code that you prefer and you would recommend for folks that want to be better CSS developers, better web developers?
That's a good question. So one of the things when you first, again, start dealing with CSS, sometimes, again, I mentioned you're in DevTools and you're just guessing at stuff. You're like, should this work? Should this work? Like one example, like I want to change the top and left position of this element and like have two boxes like overlay each other. So you might say, top -10, left +10. It's just sort of there, and maybe even set the Z index. Well, that could be very frustrating because that might just not work.
Yeah.
And but tooling, both DevTools and Firefox have come a long way, and I'll mention that. And also, there's a thing called style lint. So it's like there's ESLint is a very popular JavaScript linter. It's kind of won the battle for linting JavaScript. But now there's style lint, and it'll lint your CSS or your Sass or your less. And it has all these rules, and some of them are about specificity. Like you could set a rule like don't go over this threshold, or don't nest beyond 3 levels. Remember I mentioned that was a problem.
Oh yeah.
Or maintain a certain naming convention, and you could have a regular expression or something. But one of them is just like, hey, this property doesn't work because you don't have this other one set. So for example, if you want to change the top and left in Z index, then the position needs to be something other than static. And so it's smart enough to give you this rich information, which that's one of the things I talk about in my talk. Like if you don't know that, then it's very frustrating. And so knowing a few of these rules, or having a linter tell you and teach you to go down the right path, instead of depending on a PR review from a buddy and like, oh yeah, I forgot that again. Like it feels very demoralizing to have a friend or a coworker keep reminding you of the same thing. So if you have a tool that helps you ahead of the time, then you can actually talk about bigger ideas in a review instead of like, oh, you named this class wrong, or oh, you did this wrong. And another thing, Firefox, the developer version, the main one has these too, but the developer version, which is a little more closer to the metal, meaning they release a lot faster. They've baked a lot of these rules in. So if you open DevTools, it'll have a little exclamation point next to the rules and say, hey, this is not going to work because you have display inline. It needs to be inline block. Or, hey, this is position static. This is not going to work because it needs to be something other than static. So it could kind of teach you, and then they have a little link to say, learn more, So but I didn't have these tools when I was first learning. So it was more like, I need, interview my friends, call them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Wow, and goodness, what would we do without our contact list in the various communication, chat tools we've got?
Totally. Yeah.
It's the place I go first.
There's a good question here in the chat room, actually. You mentioned about different feature compatibility, having to use features together. There's a comment here from Creative Nobu about browser compatibility along those same lines. Let me bring it up here. One thing that they don't like about CSS these days is the need for browser compatibility, meaning I have to think about polyfills and the like. Do Cess and LAS or other preprocessors help take care of this, or is it just another way to avoid writing CSS directly?
That's a great question. Yeah. So it's better than it used to be. So when I kind of started and was thrown into this land, the browsers were still trying to iterate very quickly, which was awesome because for a long time they were pretty stagnant. And so they were wanting to add all these new features, and the way they would do that is they would add vendor prefixes. So like -WebKit something, or -MS Microsoft was one of the first people that came up with the Grid, an early version of the Grid spec. So they have, and that was back when they were building, I forget the name of it, but the apps that were based on HTML and CSS. I don't remember the
HTAs,
like the tile type things. I don't know what they're called.
Oh, the Windows Store apps with oh my gosh, WinJS.
Yeah. So
My goodness.
they came up with this CSS Grid to help lay out their apps, and it was awesome. but they were kind of the first ones, and the spec wasn't finalized. So they added a vendor prefix, and then Opera had its own. Like all the people had their own vendor prefixes, even border radius early on, if you wanted a border radius. And so a tool came out called Autoprefixer, and you just sort of run it as you're building, and it will just go through and add all the ones that you need. It basically, expands out your code to support all the vendor prefixes that are needed. And it's smart enough to know, instead of just adding them all, it's smart enough, you could tell it what browsers you want to support. Like I want the latest 2 versions of IE and evergreen browsers of everything else, or something like that. And then it will be smart enough to only add stuff that it needs. So that reduces a lot less of having to worry about some of that. Now, you still need to think about polyfills, and what a polyfill is, for the audience, if they don't know, is an example would be early on, maybe a browser, you want geolocation. So you want to be able to target, default zip code, or maybe not default zip code, but be able to pull information based on where they're located, like the weather. But not all browsers, back in the day supported that feature. So what you would do is you would pull a polyfill, which is just a piece of JavaScript, and the piece of JavaScript would mimic what the actual API for geolocation would look like if it was a modern browser. So if I was on Chrome, it would have geolocation, it would just work. But if I was on, IE7 or 8, hopefully no one has to support those, but it would notice, it would do feature detection. So it'd say, oh, does this browser support this API? And it's just an easy little JavaScript check. And if it doesn't, then it would dynamically load another piece of JavaScript that matched the same API and would call it instead. Now, it might fall back to use like IP sniffing and try to figure out sort of where you're located, which it wouldn't be as accurate as a long lat, but it's better than nothing. And so that would be a polyfill. And there's lots of polyfills for lots of technologies, but thankfully, since now Edge works on Windows 7, which is amazing, and most people are not using IE10 or lower, IE11 surprisingly has decent coverage of a lot of things that you would want. Personally, I would love not to support it on the company I'm working with, but it does surprisingly good job. Now, some of the newer stuff, definitely it can't solve, but again, if you do want to use those, you would use a polyfill.
Because the latest version of Edge with the Chromium engine, the Enterprise Edition, actually has the IE11 render engine in it as well. So if the guys are up to speed, they can upgrade to Edge and then flag, hey, use the IE11 engine. So if you got, it's always an internal site, right? You got some internal site, totally dependent on IE11, and so you got to keep IE11 around. And for a while there was, I'm totally wearing my IT hat. For a while there was literally a group policy you could configure where for particular sites, even if you're clicking on the old Edge, it would load IE11 instead, which was a little weird for users. It's like literally a different browser would pop up, but it would work. So, again, you had a catalog of these are IE11 dependent sites, and you could manage that in group policy. But what they've done now with the new Edge, with the IE11 preprocessor right into it, is literally you can just add a directive at the top of the page. It says, run this in IE11 if you have that option, and the new Edge will do it.
That's awesome.
It's just one browser.
And I might have seen some of that happening with internal websites that Microsoft runs.
Yeah, maybe. But this is stuff we talk about over on Run As, right? And it's, if you're a dev and you're dealing with this problem, go into IT and saying, get us all onto Edge because it'll solve it. Like, you're probably not going to sell that successfully, but hopefully they'll get there.
Now,
because that will become policy.
Now, but guys, something that I ran into, something that I've seen, and I use this statement whenever I talk about Blazor, is that everybody was kind of forced to upgrade your browser when Spectre and Meltdown happened. Is that something that you've seen, Elijah? Is that since that summer of 2018 when Spectre and Meltdown hit, everybody had to upgrade, patch your operating system, patch your browser, because that JavaScript could be exploited. It feels like since that time we're in this modern era of browsers where, you don't see IE10 because everybody was forced to upgrade to IE 11 at least, right?
Yeah, the term evergreen browser is because now most modern browsers will just automatically download the new version behind the scenes, and when you reboot, you get it. Or when you close the browser and open it up, you have the new version. And so people are getting new versions all the time and aren't really realizing it.
The fact that everybody collaborates over the XMS standards now, so a browser upgrade doesn't break sites anymore.
Right. They're a lot more careful. Yeah.
I mean, I've been running the beta Canary, the Chromium version of Edge for a long time, and I still occasionally have a site where it's like, this doesn't seem right. Open Chrome, run. Oh yeah, okay. Some things rendering differently, even though the render engine is literally the same.
Yeah.
Something.
I've totally seen that, and I love Canary versions. I like the bleeding edge, but the nice thing about those versions is that you can install it side by side with the official version. So if something ever goes wrong, which rarely I've ever seen many things go wrong, occasionally like you mentioned, but you always have the fallback. Okay, I'll just go to the real version and maybe not have that latest feature that just came out. Yeah.
Whatever it may be, it's odd little things, but yeah, I don't. The average mortal should never deal with this. But
sorry.
I feel like we've gotten over the hump with browser capabilities, where for the most part, everybody's playing on the same field. They're all negotiating the same sets of standards. The race is kind of done, and everybody won. Like we've all passed, and the rate of new feature creation is slower and being done more in committee rather than by forcing it onto browsers for people to play with.
Yes, and to his point, if there is a feature like a newer one, you could always go to the website caniuse.com,
right,
and type in the feature, and it will show you which browsers and which versions support it. And then right below it, there's a section, and it usually has a polyfill. Like, so if you really do want it, but you're on IE11, it'll have a GitHub repo where you could pull down that.
Yeah,
that's some fallback. So.
Is there a demo you can show us? I'd love to see your VS Code setup. To be honest, I've played VS Code, but you as the pro web developer, I think your style would be fascinating to watch. Come on. Let
me find a non-work project.
Yeah, don't violate any privacy.
Yeah.
Your bits and pieces from your talk is perfectly fine, but I'm just really curious about your setup just as a Mac user and a web dev, and you've seriously productive on a stack outside of Studio. That's cool to me.
There's something to be said about the GitHub repository of dot files that developers have, right? Here's all the configuration that I have for all of my editors and tools, so that even if I lose this machine, I can just do a git pull and I'm up and running again with my configuration.
Yeah.
I've been putting more of that in OneDrive.
Unfortunately, I don't have many personal things on this machine, but I can show you some snippets of the talk to kind of tease like what people might get in. Let's see, do I need to share?
Yep. Bottom right of the Skype screen is it looks like 2 interlocking squares. And that'll share screens for us.
Oh, gotcha. All right, so screen share. Oh, I gotta give permissions.
Let me do the thing.
And the right side of your screen.
Oh, they want me to quit Skype to do that. So.
Oh.
Skype's your friend.
That's a bummer. So I can't share apparently. But I did bring VS Code up. So there's a couple other extensions that I can mention that are helpful for other things. One's related to CSS and JavaScript. It's called, I can't show you, apparently. It's called Prettier.
Oh, yeah.
So and it works with CSS and all of the less and Sass and all those things as well. And even Markdown, which is kind of cool. But for many years, there was this battle about formatting your code. Like, should it be indented, by spaces or tabs, or where should the braces go? And actually in JavaScript, the braces actually are pretty important where they go, because you could actually have some subtle bugs. But it was like a religious thing, and there are a lot of feelings about it, and it just felt like a waste of time. And I don't know why Prettier kind of won this war, but it kind of did, at least in the front end land. It's just a tool, and there aren't many options. Like, you get what you get, but it's really quite smart. And it will work for React because JSX is kind of it looks like elements in there. If you're not used to that, that's kind of weird. But it's smart enough to know lots of languages. But a lot of people will just on save, it'll automatically just format the way things need to look. And once you get into that flow, even with CSS or JavaScript, it's really quite nice. Like, maybe you're someone, you copy a little snippet, you paste it in, but it's indented far, and then you find yourself like tabbing or spacing, look just right to fit your standards. You just save it, and it just goes where it needs to go. And if it doesn't, like, then you forgot a brace or something. You're like, oh, I need to fix that. So that's really nice, but it also works with CSS files, so if you want it to kind of look nice. And then Markdown, that's really cool. Like, it'll actually kind of format things to be consistent. So that's something I use on personal projects. So I actually got bitten several times because I use it all the time on my side projects, but my work doesn't use it. They use kind of rules through ESLint, and for different reasons. But I've had the mistake of, because I still use the same VS Code setup sometimes. This is a new machine, so I don't really have as much personal stuff as I used to. But I would save, and then everything would change, like the whole file. And I'm like, and we do everything in Git, so like the diff would sometimes I'd forget and check it in, and then like, you changed every file here. But there's a setting, thankfully, to say if you don't have a .prettier config file, like one of those dot files, don't actually format the file. And so I typically, because if it's a project that doesn't use prettier, you probably don't have a config file for it. So that saved me once I learned that. But before that, it was tricky. I'd have to remember, like, disable the plugin or whatever. So I use that all the time. And then GitLens is an amazing. This isn't really specific to CSS, but it's an amazing
Visual Studio. Yeah. Oh,
does it work in that too? Yeah.
It's a separate feature in Visual Studio, but in VS Code, it's tremendous.
Yeah. So if you use Git at all, it's amazing. I wish I could show you, but I'd have to get off the call. But the thing I like about it is it's not in your face. Like, it's pretty subtle. Like, if you want the tools, you can open it up. But if you're just in a file and you click on a line, it'll tell you it real subtly, like, when was the last time someone touched this line. It's like a git blame, but it's nicer because it's not saying it's blaming. But like, when did they do it? What was the commit message? And above each function or class, it'll actually say when that was last modified by whom. So it really augments my workflow really nicely without being in my face. And you could tweak it out pretty close. But I don't have many extensions other than
do with the messages. Like, does it help to see, nobody's touched this code in 2 years? Or is it like, it was literally worked on yesterday, maybe I should, study it closer? Like, what's your reaction to knowing?
Usually it's like, it's a piece of code that I'm like, I wonder why this little if check was added. And then I might look to see what feature that was, what feature was being worked on when that if statement was added. Or maybe I should reach out to Josh.
Yeah, you've got a name to talk to. It says, hey, I'm looking at this, tell me about it.
Yeah. And so it's more a conversational piece. It's, and again, I don't like the term git blame, because usually when I try that, it's me. So
what was I thinking?
Which Elijah was it that did this? Was it 2018 Elijah, or was it 2019?
Yeah, hopefully always learning, Elijah. Yeah.
Fuel actually makes a good point here. Hopefully, when you put those commit messages in, you included a ticket number or an issue number. I love seeing that connection in GitHub, being able to go from commit message or pull request back to an issue. And since it links those things automatically for you, to be able to have that connective tissue, to be able to step through and see, here's why this was open, here's who fixed it, and the thought process. That's big.
That's big.
And the things that you can do with it, GitLens, right? Not like you said, not just CSS, not just web development. I've used it with C#. I've used it with Markdown to be able to see exactly when things change and be able to see a history of when things changed inside the editor too. Tremendous feature for I don't care what you're editing. you want to be able to do that, not just blame, but audit of how this thing came to be. Oh, so good. Now, Richard, dare I ask, Elijah, there's been a lot of talk recently about fonts in different editors, right? No. JetBrains came out with their own font. I know. Microsoft came out with Cascadia Code. Some of us prefer to use Papyrus as their editor font.
No, nobody prefers.
No. Are you a Cascadia Code type person, or using what's your preferred font that you're using with your editor? And this came up in a previous discussion as well. I want to make sure that nobody's as crazy as me with Papyrus.
I tend to like Thyra Code.
Oh my gosh.
And it supports a lot of cool ligatures. So like I do like ES6 and above. So like fat arrows I do all the time. So that the equals greater than sign, it actually looks like an arrow, or the triple equals, which in JavaScript is weird if you're used to C#, but it actually makes it look like one big fat triple equals, or not double equals. It has a line through it, and so it really makes it look kind of nice. So I tend to use. I don't usually purchase those. There's some really more expensive fonts like Operator Mono and things like that look really pretty, but I'm fine with Thyra Code.
Yeah, it'd be hard to quantify like what's the ROI on spending on one of those fonts. Like what's the productivity benefit? How do you actually even measure that? I mean, it must be there, but it's a tricky thing to measure.
Certainly not as much for editor, but definitely when you're publishing, when you're choosing and setting those font tags that you're outputting. So
I've also Source Code Pro I used for a while. I often use fonts that have powerline support. So in your terminal, if you want to have a really fancy looking terminal with kind of weird symbols and whatnot, a lot of these fonts you could kind of embed additional symbols that make your command line look really interesting.
So okay, and I've heard a lot of folks really got into power lines and customizing their terminal the right way and all these things. Come on, does it add that much value to put the power lines in there, or is it just a way so that you can see, here's my folder that I'm in separate from your Git branch and all those things, right?
So the one I use, it's one of those power lines. It's called Power Level 9K, but it has all those things. But some of the it can provide you, again, it shows you what branch of Git you're on if you're on Git. It'll show you what version of Node you're on, which is important for me because different projects that we're on use different versions of Node. So quickly I know, like, instead of saying Node-V or npm-v to figure out what version of npm I'm on, they're just right up in front of my face. Also, if I have unstaged commits, it'll have a little indicator there. Or if I'm not in sync with my origin, it has kind of some symbols there. So it's a lot of nice, teeny little bits of information that I could get otherwise, but it just would be more work. Another cool thing mine does is if I'm running a process that I'm not sure what the threshold is, and I'm sure I could change it, but it takes more than a second, it'll actually have a little timer to the right to tell you how long it took. Because oftentimes, in retrospect, you want to know that. Like, oh man, how long did that take? And then you'll run it again with the time command. But it's just kind of in your face, like, oh yeah, how long? That took about 5 minutes. Or if you're, how long did my test have to take to run? Or how long did that build take to run? And you're just kind of curious, maybe you want to trim it down. Anyway, but the other nature of it, how it looks pretty, is more a preference. But I do like the additional information that it provides me.
I was an immediate convert to PoshGit, the PowerShell Git add-in, for exactly that, so that I could get indicator of, here's my GitHub branch, here's my Git branch, here's my whether or not I'm synchronized with that remote branch. Absolutely a must-have. I haven't gotten into configuring the power lines with that. I know, like I said, I know some folks have gotten really carried away with this, and it's almost like it's almost, Richard, it's like showing off when people show off their command prompt now. Look at how fancy mine is. I spent 8 hours making it look this good.
Well, yeah, and Windows Terminal gives you all the tweaking and tuning things. Like
Yeah.
A little mental over just, how much information you want to embed in there. Background colors and font choices and
Okay, Elijah, I was getting mocked on my Twitch stream because I had a black background for my font for my console, and that's how they knew I wasn't using the latest Windows terminal. But now I've got all the tabs. I've got a nice background logo that's semi-transparent, so you can kind of see through.
It's like you're almost a grown-up.
I have a GPU for a reason, darn it.
I need to use it. You can't just sit there. Yeah.
Let that GPU lay around there smoking cigarettes. Put it to work. Here's some scalar functions. Work harder.
That's right.
I have a little. For a while, I had a computer that was pretty old, and we were maxing it out all the time with the stuff we're doing at work with all these Docker containers and like running VMs, and like it was just working really hard. And so I wanted in my face to know how hard it was. And so on the Mac, there's a program called RunCat. And it's a little teeny cat that runs up in the system bar, and the faster he runs, the harder the CPU is working. Oh. And so it's just so fun. And now that I have a new MacBook 16, and it's I hardly max it out, but I still like little cat just to see how slowly he's kind of prancing around. You could change the different avatars that it uses, but it's just a fun little thing.
They have too much horsepower. We can just have some fun with it, actually.
Yeah. I was like, might as well do something fun. When I usually screen share, people are like, "What is that cat in your?"
You know, there's a cat on your screen.
Yeah, I was like, "What is that for?" Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
Maybe a side project idea for a Windows machine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Should we get into the monitor conversation? Fuel Snable's asking me about my 43.
Ooh.
Okay. So there's definitely a hardware thing there for when you are a designer, when you are building websites, you do want to have these things side by side, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Elijah, gosh, I got to imagine you're not alt-tabbing back and forth between Visual Studio Code and your browser, right?
No, I have like two externals in my primary. I usually have VS Code on one, browser on the other, and I usually have the terminal down at the bottom because I do a lot of stuff there. I've actually made a custom dashboard that is basically pulling all the different things that I need. Like, am I linked in the right projects? And are there any outstanding GitHub repos? Did anyone in Slack say anything I need to know about? Like, I have all these. It's actually, I did a talk last Dev Intersection, which I'm not giving to this one, but I hope to do again. But it's about having fun and being productive in the terminal. And I enjoyed the talk. Actually, my slides were in the terminal. I wrote a custom framework that would use Markdown and React, and you could actually show the slides, and they're interactive, which is interesting. But I kind of geeked out on some of this stuff, which you brought it up. I didn't. So, but anyway, but yeah. So that's having that real estate and be able to see exactly when I change this updates is really valuable.
So, I mean, is 43 that much benefit above a 32, Richard?
So let's talk about a few different monitors. And what are we really going after here? So the redeeming feature of the 43 is it a true 4K, so 3840 by 2160 at 100 DPI. So no scaling. You're running at 100%. You're not running 125 or 50. Or heaven help you on the 3K by 2K on the Surface Book where you're running 200. And even with my 50-plus-year-old eyes, I can see the whole thing. So the redeeming feature is the number of lines of code you can see. But that 21, like if I have another monitor. I have one of the 34-inch widescreens, the 21 by 9s, the really really wide one, and that's 3840. So same horizontal resolution by 1440.
And I'm looking at one of those. Okay. Yeah. And
so the difference between 1440 and 2160 is 50% more lines. And that comes down to lines of code you can see.
Yeah.
Okay. But the reality is at that 4K screen with Studio blown all the way across it, which physically is just a long way. Okay, like the up left right corner of that 43-inch is almost in another time zone.
I'm moving my mouse.
That's amazing.
I have a rollerball for a reason, right? I got miles to go.
Yeah.
If you know what I know? If the method won't fit in 2160, that method's too long.
That's your linter right there. Yeah.
Like, you should cut that down a little. Like, you're doing too many things in that. That's a lot of code you could see. So I think that's become my gauge when I'm looking at any screen. I'm not saying any particular screen is. Can you see all the lines of code of the method you're working in? Right? The piece of code you're looking at, can you see it all? Are you needing to scroll up and down? And I think on this 34 at 1440, it's most of the time that's sufficient. And on the 43, it's almost always more than enough. And if it isn't, there's something wrong with the method.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've kind of cheated because I have a 27 here in the middle, and I have two 24s turned portrait next to it.
Love them. Yeah.
So I'll have OBS up on top, and I'll have other things down below. I'll have different status and over here, and then my stage is in the middle. But when I'm coding just doing personal work, I'll put Visual Studio down the side of one of these. So I've got a lot of vertical code. Now, I've got 1920 lines of vertical code because I've taken 1920, 1080 and turned it portrait.
Turned it sideways.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and so again, the only number I think that really matters to you is that vertical lines. So you've got choices, right? It's 1440 or it's 1920 with the little portrait play, which is something I used to do, or it's 2160. And then the question is also scale. You know, do you need to scale this? So I think part of the justification of the 43 inch is I am deeply middle-aged now, and actually being able to see that stuff helps. Because I do struggle with stuff that's not zoomed enough, which I didn't used to do. But it is also a hell of a big monitor. Like, you need a lot of space for it. You need to sit away from it. I think it's the built-in stand. It's also heavy. It's a 40-pound monitor.
Oh my gosh.
So regular monitor arms can't hold it. You need a special monitor.
Wow.
Most monitor arms pop out at 25 pounds. And
is it curved at all? Or?
It's not curved. It's completely flat. I have a curve. I find the curves annoying for coding. Curve is great, but coding, I think that bend bugs me.
Really? Okay. I have a curved monitor that the wife uses that I haven't tried yet.
Yeah, you'll have to play with it, see if it bothers you. Maybe it's just me. I'm crazy. But if I had my druthers, the built-in stand that came with that 43, it's not quite big enough. It should still, if I really was going to tweak this monitor, going all out, optimal configuration, I think it actually, the top needs to lean in a little.
Oh.
So far away. And so but the built-in stand can't do that. And looking, Funis Stable's joking about the $1,000 stand, which is the Apple thing. I'm like, no, talk about dropping $1,000 on a human connections multi-bar monitor, which I'm gonna have to drill holes into my desk to hold in place just so that I can tip it 2 degrees up in. Haven't done it. Nope.
No.
Not yet.
But I'll tell you, if I was gonna do that, I'd hang a pair of monitors off the side of that, because why not have a triple rig that's 7 feet wide?
So good.
The other piece of this is my desk. I'm in a corner desk with it, and it's set far enough back that I think I could put like a 32 touch screen on a low angle in front of it as well and go total Star Trek on it.
Oh my gosh.
That would be pretty awesome.
But who has the time? So, I don't have the cycles for it. I'll admit one thing with that 43, there consistently is work I need to do where I'm like, I'm going to wait till I get to the 43 for this. Maybe I'm working on my laptop, even with the second monitor on my laptop, the little portable. That's pretty great, but there's certain projects like looking over a 22-room conference schedule in Excel, where
forget it.
43 fully open, can see the whole thing. Nothing touches that. Those are days where you just get a big old grin on your face for buying that ridiculous monitor.
And I have to scroll side to side to read your notes.
Damn right.
That's right.
What I don't have to do, scroll it all. I still got space on the right.
Fine. You should see the schedule for MVP Summit and I have to.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Scroll. Everything's in Excel. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, everything's still in Excel for all those times. But that the biggest thing when you think about monitors is that DPI. Do you need to scale it? That's what makes the difference.
I like that on my Lenovo Yoga. I've had this laptop for a while, and I'd love to hear what laptop you're carrying now, Elijah. But I've had this Lenovo Yoga for a while, and it's got a 4K display on it, but it only has an Intel 620 chipset. Mm. But when I'm displaying Excel and I'm displaying code on it, it looks gorgeous on that screen. If I try and do anything much other processing, gameplay, it's like forget it. But on a 4K display on that Yoga is amazing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we recently got MacBook 16s, the new one they came out with at work, and I had the previous version, which just had the touch bar and no escape key, and the keyboard was getting a lot of flack because it was just horrible. A lot of keys not working or repeating, and so that was very frustrating coding. Like the last time I went to DEVintersection, I was gonna bring my work computer, or I had all the code on there, but my son came in and he was watching me, and he's like, he needed to actually do something, fill in a form, and he couldn't do it. He's like, how do you even work on this thing? And I was like, I don't know. And so I moved all the code and put it on a different machine and took that, and I was a little nervous because I'm like, do I have everything I need? And it was just so frustrating. Eventually they got us these new computers, and the keyboard issue seemed to be fixed in the MacBook 16 Pro, and I love having the escape key back. I was very frustrated because
those keyboards should be great. Like, goodness knows they're expensive.
Oh yeah, and because you could technically do the escape, but it was on the touch bar and it wasn't quite all the way in the corner.
Yeah,
it was off a little bit, and so with muscle memory, I'd always go to the corner, and occasionally I use, like, if I'm in the terminal already and I need to do something quickly, I'll usually go to Vim just to get in there. Yep. And escape being moved really through my groove, and so I use cap locks instead. But then I'm like, which computer am I on? And so like, oh, my other computers, I use cap locks, and it was just annoying. So this one is it's what it should be. It's fast, keyboard works, and I have escape. Those seem like things that shouldn't be an issue, but they were.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the screen's great. I haven't had. It's very fast. So
I'm impressed with guys like Mark Miller, who yes, he uses a laptop, but he always brings a keyboard with him.
Yes.
He's always. I mean, this is the guy who wrote Code Rush. Like, he cares so much about coding efficiency. He's very careful about RSI, about repetitive strain, and he usually wears wrist braces. But he carries his personal favorite, rattly cherry key keyboard. I have one of each. I have a proper cherry key with a great rattle. It's lovely, and then I have another keyboard that's completely silent for doing recordings and things.
Yeah.
Are we at that place where it's like, why don't you just carry a keyboard? Like, maybe you got to do that.
I carry actually, you told me about this, Richard, the Asus external monitor. I don't know if that's the one you still use, but I'm
still using it.
That's been great for me. So
I'm worn it out, right? Like, it's got a lot of miles on it for me. It's flown a couple 300,000 miles now, so it's got a lot. It's getting tired.
You've seen the external monitor that I've started bringing. Was it cheap one I got for $120? Plugs in with USB.
Yeah, powered by USB is awesome.
Yeah, totally.
Gadgets, so many gadgets.
Yes. My gosh. All right.
Well,
I think that's.
It's great chatting with you. I really appreciate your take on CSS. I think the talk's going to be amazing, and I know you're doing a bunch of others. You're the React guy too, so
you have a workshop and an intro talk, for React. Yep.
Oh, that's great stuff.
Great stuff.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks again for coming out. We'll see you in April.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Take care. And he's out.
There you go.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff going on there with the technology, with how to be a better web developer and the tools and how they all fit together. And it sounds like he's got that whole package. Really.
Well, I love the combination of an experienced speaker and an experienced developer doing something they're not experienced in and sort of sharing their learnings of how they got better with stuff. Because I think that's the boat we're usually in. My average attendee at DEVintersection, there are some relatively new developers, but most people have had some miles on them. They're confident and competent, but they need to try new things, and they're not used to being new to stuff. And so someone like Elijah can really speak their language. You came from a set of skills. This is a new skill. Here's how to think about some of this stuff.
Isn't it interesting that we as developers are agents of change, and we struggle with changes to our own tools, languages?
Well, yeah, I'm very don't move my cheese. Yeah, here we are moving somebody else's, right? Like it's you try to avoid the hypocrisy, but try.
Right.
We're going to have good days and bad days. We're all mortals here. But and hopefully that translates into some empathy for the folks we're moving the cheese on too. It's like, yeah, I know change is hard.
Yeah.
And dev is technically not that risk averse a role. Like I've also lived as an IT guy where like change is good. Go first, right? Like,
yeah. My gosh, the folks who work in operations, they do not want you to touch their systems.
Well, yeah, and it's when my measurement of success is uptime.
Yeah,
change is the enemy, right? But if I don't, in the end, I don't have a job if I'm not providing services to the folks that make the money in the organization, and so I have to tolerate this change. I have to manage the risk of it. Mm-hmm. But it's a much more cautious lifestyle. You're not creating new things all the time. You're dealing with new things arriving and keeping them in a box, trying to keep them managed. For me, it's always about, can we engender enough empathy with each other to appreciate that everybody's job is hard. Making new things, hard. Making sure things keep running and the new things don't hurt us, also hard.
It's, yeah, right? And this is where good practices, good testing, good DevOps, good good deployment, making sure that those gates are in place, those approval processes.
Failures, right? Like actually build something that was buildable, making sure it's deployed properly, the rights are in correct place, like all of that automatable, let us do nothing dumb and only deal with the hard. And then also the cultural shift. This is a whole DevOps conversation we could get into as well. The small, routine, incremental changes. So that, that integrate first mindset that we're running lots of dark code in our projects now too, so that they get benchmarked and tested even before they're exposed to the user, and integration problems are detected early and often. Like those are harder things to do for routinely maintained software. And I don't know how many folks really deal with that, where there's any given app where we're making that many changes to it. I think there's far more folks I've talked to, especially in the dev intersection community, where it's not that I have one app that I'm working on every week. It's that I'm working on a different app every week. We got a huge change log on a couple of dozen apps that I'm responsible for. And I've got to go in and, bounce from app to app and pick up where I left off last time and make that change. And hopefully the integration works.
It's that enterprise environment where you're right. Folks don't just have one or two apps they're managing. It's dozens. Yeah.
And I certainly am aware from Microsoft's perspective that these are the folks that are trying to justify moving to Core. That aren't on the latest bits, that their web forms apps serve them well.
Yeah. Up and running, built a simple CRUD application that points to this data source and this database and has just a little bit of business logic in it because Skippy in accounting needs this rule to be in place, and boom, there it is.
But it's a hovering request for a mobile version.
Yes.
Right? And that's when you're like, man, we did a talk. I had a talk at DevIn a couple of years ago. I think it was Paul Sheriff who did it. It was like how to make web forms work on mobile apps. And boy, that room was full. It sort of touched this button of they're getting that request and it's just sitting on the to-do list someday.
Yeah.
And making web forms work on mobile's hard. And maybe Blazor's away. Like there's technology coming down the pipe that's going to hopefully make this a little easier. Rewrites are not an option. They're expensive and time-consuming and risky. I took this app that worked just fine, and I'm going to break the snot out of it for a new.
But see, I think web forms encouraged for mobile developers encouraged what they call alternative rendering. Right? You had here. Go use the .mobile whatever version of this page, and it's going to do the same thing, but it's going to have a slightly different user interface that's optimized for your device.
Yeah, that came along.
Yeah,
right? And suddenly it's like, okay, how about dot tablet? Is that going to the T dot instead of M dot? Right? It's like, no, this isn't working. Now we're going to have to go with this, style querying and being able to adjust to different screen sizes and build it all as one page, because otherwise, that creates its own problems, right? It's just the evolution of web development right there.
But Musical Bookworm makes a very good point around this, that as a developer, though, it is hard to convince your manager that you should spend hours and dollars migrating a working site, working application, because that technology is old.
Yeah. And honestly, if it's serving, let it serve.
Let it serve.
I only brought it up because it was the manager who came to you and said, hey, make it work on my iPad.
Right.
Right. And it's like, okay, well, this tech was developed at a time when iPads didn't exist, and screen form factors were not even HD.
Yeah.
So, and DPIs were in the double digits. So, gee, I wonder why it's struggling on your iPad.
When you need to update an application to deal with modern, and it sounds so weird to say modern and be referring to 2015.
Yeah, it's new requirements. I mean, that's the bottom line. Big new requirements, it needs new tooling. And that's the conversation you have to have. The question then is it worth it?
Right.
Like, it's not up to us as devs to say yay or nay. It's for us to make an estimate of effort. And they can yay or nay. If you really wanted to work on your iPad, this is the time that we need to allot to it, and maybe some new tooling and some risk. I am absolutely going to take working code and break it, right? Well, make it in different copies somewhere, and the old one will keep running. Best we can.
I go back to the lessons we learned with building Xamarin applications and building modern. I don't want to use modern, but building Windows 8 apps, right? Where you were forced to push all of your business logic outside of your user interface project because you had a completely different user interface for iOS and for Android. You couldn't build the same ones, right? And same thing for Windows 8. So if you've got that old web forms project, push your business logic out.
Yeah, but that's not a trivial piece of work either.
No.
Web form did not enforce an awful lot of scalable, performant coding styling, right? A lot of code behind. You could, if you were diligent, sort of simulate an MVC styling and keep your code in a controller, but that was up
Guilty
to you.
As charged. Yes.
That's just discipline, right?
Yes.
And it's the sort of the logical process we go through as developers every time. There's a discipline approach, then there's a tooling approach, and then there's a paradigm approach.
Yeah.
And the tooling, the discipline approach, it's totally up to you. You're going to make mistakes. The tooling approach makes it easier to do the right thing, and the paradigm approach says you can't do it any other way. Like, there's only one way to go. It's like trying not to do object orientation in C#, where the paradigm is everything's an object, dude. Like, that's all there is. There isn't anything else.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
great stuff.
Yeah, I mean, MVC got us to a good tooling place. MVVM as well. I have fond memories of all of that, and we still need discipline around a bunch of those things. But this is code that's been around for a long time, and it predates an awful lot of our appreciation of that. And we had these arguments. This is why MVC, the product, came into existence. Back in 2006, Microsoft could see clearly, hey, we've hit the wall with ASP.NET web forms in terms of certain classes of projects where they need better testing harnesses and more scale and so forth, and had a complete rethink, a different approach to it. It didn't make web forms go away for certain classes of projects.
It's still great.
It's working today.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There is something to be said though about the drag and droppy types of interfaces to build applications. There's we don't even use the rapid application development, the RAD metaphors anymore, right? We don't talk about that. And Rocky Locke had that great line one time. He's like, I had forgotten just how productive WinForms was. Yes.
Until I had to go back to an old project and build a new form. And it's like, holy man.
Yeah.
But that was also in a time of consistent screen sizes.
Yep.
All there was desktop machines. There was barely laptops. And
DPIs as well.
DPI was set.
Yep.
And there was very consistent UI metaphor. Back when the GUI was new, consistent UI metaphors were super important. And the fact that WinForms basically dictated file on the left, help on the right, toolbars here, and SDI or MDI. There was all a set of standards around that. And again, it was paradigmic in that you had to fight mightily to not fall into that pattern. But hardware's different. Things have changed. Expectations different. Inclusiveness is more important. Making forms that more people can use with different sets of skills and different abilities. All of those requirements land on us today. No wonder the tooling's more complex.
For sure. And the inclusiveness of design is something that folks don't think about right off the bat. And even the discussion of tabs versus spaces is an inclusive discussion.
Well, we had this come up already on these streams, right? The tabs, the inclusive choice, because they're easier for those that connect with the code differently to understand this is indentation versus spacing for functionality.
Yep. Yeah.
It's a different thing. It's not necessarily needed for you. If you're fortunate enough that the difference between tab and a space makes no difference, then it makes no difference.
Right.
For certain folks,
it makes a big difference.
Just a tab makes a difference, and we should help. We can help.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a show, my friend.
Not an easy week this week.
We do.
Yeah,
there's a lot happening.
It was already a long week, right? So I hope you had a good President's Day. For us up here in British Columbia, it was Family Day, and again, nice I had the engagement party. So yeah, it was a great day for me. But and hopefully for my daughter too.
Yeah.
And her, they seem to have had fun. It's a little stressful, I think, to be the focus of attention too. It's not. I was sort of like, this is your warm up. Wait for the wedding. You have no idea.
There's a lot more coming, kid.
But our next show is not till Saturday now.
Okay.
Right? We actually had to do some rescheduling there.
Had to do some shuffling this week.
But the show is with Carla Vieira.
Okay.
She's out of Brazil. And she's an AI person. So one of the talks she's doing for us at the show is Unexplainable AI. And this was actually, that term was coined by DARPA, by the defense agency. Speaking specifically about the problem with neural nets, where you sort of have this black box effect where it's like, I've trained you to identify cats. 99.9% of the time you identify a cat. Every so often you miss. You call dog a cat. But we have no way to know why. Like, why did it get that one wrong? And that lack of understanding, that lack of explainability about these things, when you start throwing it into stuff like driving cars, we kind of want to know why things work the way they work.
Yeah, it's a little different, isn't it? There's definitely something there to learn from her.
I like the program. The program metaphor is great. For years and years, we've done this sort of imperative program where it's like, I have a set of inputs. I give you code, which is a set of rules. You provide me the outputs I expect. In these machine learning models, it's I have a set of inputs and a set of outputs, and I let you train to figure out the rules. The problem is I can't read the rules you came up with. So I'm glad that you could come up with some rules. I just like to know what they are. And to me, that's explainable AI. So Harlow's brand new to our show.
Okay.
Super excited to ever come out from Brazil. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I think it'll be really cool. Now, next week, we're working hard because next week's going to get a 3-show week back to back and the end of this series. So
it'll be great.
We have a few days. I'm working on the history.net this week. I'm going to be head down writing.
Very cool. I'm working on Blazor for web forms, working on that ebook and get that wrapped up and delivered. I've got 4 chapters left that we're going to be sending out. So it's a busy week. And we have the Visual Studio for Mac event on Monday.
Yeah, congratulations on that. That's going to be and then we stream day after day
after day. Yes. So
not the you do streams every day on top of these ones too. So you're a streaming god.
Well, thank you. We'll make it happen. It'll work out for the best. Cool.
And then again, we got to think hard about MVP Summit, huh? That's coming up.
Yep, MVP Summit planning's done. Sessions are laid out, and hopefully people are writing their sessions out there that are speaking at the event.
That would be good.
So very cool stuff. Well, thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, good fun. All right, one, and I'll talk to you on Saturday.
Take care. We'll see you on Saturday. See ya.